Emily Hayes once believed her marriage was perfect. She and Daniel lived in a quiet farmhouse in Kentucky, surrounded by open fields and soft hills. From the outside, their life looked peaceful. But inside their home, love had faded into silence. Daniel spent long hours at work, often coming home too tired to talk. His eyes were always on his phone or his computer, and the man who used to make her laugh now barely noticed her. Emily tried to reach him in every way she could, cooking his favorite meals, planning small surprises, even suggesting weekend trips. But each effort ended with the same tired response. Maybe later. I've got too much to do. Those words began to echo in her heart, louder than the sound of the wind through the fields. One morning after another, breakfast eaten in silence, Emily stepped outside to breathe. The sky stretched wide above her, full of soft morning light, and the air smelled like fresh grass. That's when she saw him, a tall brown horse standing by the old wooden fence at the edge of their land. His coat shimmered under the sun, and his calm eyes met hers with quiet curiosity. For a moment, Emily forgot everything: her loneliness, the tension, the emptiness of the house. She slowly walked closer, her shoes sinking into the damp ground, and reached out a hand. The horse didn't pull away. He lowered his head slightly, as if inviting her to stay. She laughed softly, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. "Hey there, beautiful," she whispered. The horse flicked his ears, calm and still. Emily stroked his mane and felt something warm spread through her chest, feeling she hadn't felt in months. It wasn't romance or passion. It was connection. For so long she'd felt invisible, but this gentle creature saw her without judgment. From that day, Emily began visiting the fence more often. She learned that the horse's name was Apollo, belonging to a neighbor who was often away. Each afternoon she'd bring him apples or brush his mane, and for those few hours the world seemed softer. In the barn, there were no cold glances, no silent dinners, no empty conversations. There was only the sound of breathing, the brushing of straw, and the quiet rhythm of trust forming between a woman and a horse. At home, Daniel hardly noticed her time away. He was buried in work, his attention always elsewhere. The more distant he became, the more Emily found peace in Apollo's presence. She began to realize how much she'd been missing, not grand gestures, but the simple comfort of being heard, of being understood. She didn't talk much while she brushed Apollo's coat, but somehow it felt like he listened anyway. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Emily stood by the fence and watched the light fade over the fields. A breeze moved through her hair, carrying the scent of hay and soil. She felt alive, again still lonely, still unsure, but no longer numb. Something inside her had awakened. She didn't know it then, but this quiet bond with a horse would lead her toward understanding what love truly meant, and force her to face the truth about her marriage, her heart, and the life she'd built on silence. Apollo became Emily's quiet companion, her escape from the cold distance that filled her home. Every afternoon she found herself walking down the dirt path to the barn, her boots crunching against gravel, her heart beating faster with each step. The first time she brushed his mane, Apollo turned his head slightly, as if recognizing her gentle touch. His calmness made her feel safe. In his presence, the heavy thoughts she carried began to fade. The loneliness, the doubt, the constant ache of being unseen, everything grew lighter when she was near him. Days turned into weeks. The barn became her world of peace. She would talk to Apollo while cleaning his stall or feeding him apples. "You're lucky," she'd say softly, smiling through tired eyes. "No meetings, no cold dinners, no walls between you and the world." Apollo would flick his ears, listening in silence. Emily didn't need answers. She just needed someone or something that didn't turn away. At home, Daniel grew even more distant. He was polite but hollow. He'd nod at her words, but his mind was somewhere else, lost in work and numbers. One night, Emily waited with dinner ready, candles lit, hoping he'd notice. When he walked in, he barely glanced at the table. "I already ate," he muttered and disappeared into his office. She sat alone, staring at the untouched meal. The only sound was the ticking clock, marking each second of silence. The next morning, she went straight to the barn. She didn't even think her feet led her there. Apollo greeted her with a soft snort, brushing his nose against her arm. That simple gesture broke her. She leaned her head against his neck, tears falling freely. "I don't even know if he loves me anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It feels like I'm married to a shadow." Apollo didn't move away. He just stood there, steady and calm, his warmth grounding her. In that still moment, Emily felt seen, as if the world had finally paused to listen. She spent hours in the barn that day talking about everything she couldn't say at home. Her childhood dreams, her fear of being forgotten, her wish for a love that felt alive again. Apollo listened, his dark eyes reflecting the quiet strength she needed. When she left that evening, the sunset painted the sky in gold and pink. It was the first time in months she smiled without forcing it. But something inside her began to change. She wasn't just drawn to Apollo as an animal, she was drawn to what he represented: freedom, trust, the kind of presence that didn't demand, didn't criticize, didn't judge. She realized how much she'd been craving emotional connection, something simple and true. Daniel noticed her absence one evening. "You've been spending a lot of time at that barn," he said casually, while scrolling through his phone. "It's peaceful there," she replied, not looking up. He only shrugged and went back to his screen. That small moment told her everything. The man who once asked how her day went now didn't even ask where she spent it. The next day the sky was gray and heavy with rain, but Emily still went to the barn. She brushed Apollo's coat, humming quietly to herself. As she worked, a feeling of calm spread through her chest. The world outside her marriage, her loneliness didn't seem to matter here. For the first time in a long while, she felt strong again. When she returned home that night, Daniel was asleep on the couch. She looked at him and realized how much space now existed between the invisible wall built from years of small neglects. She covered him with a blanket and walked to the window. Outside, lightning flickered in the distance. The reflection of her face on the glass looked older, wiser, but also lonelier. The next morning, she woke before sunrise and went back to the barn. Apollo was waiting, as if he knew she would come. She pressed her forehead against his and whispered, "You're the only one who listens." That truth hurt more than she expected. As days passed, Emily began to understand that her bond with Apollo wasn't about escape, it was about finding pieces of herself she'd lost. The care, the patience, the tenderness she showed him were all things she wished someone would show her. Apollo reminded her what kindness felt like, and in doing so, made her realize how empty her marriage had become. One afternoon, while the wind rushed through the open fields, Emily stood beside Apollo and looked at the horizon. The air smelled like rain, and clouds rolled low. Her heart ached not from guilt, but from longing. She wanted Daniel to look at her the way she looked at the world, with attention, with presence. But deep down, she knew he wouldn't. As she closed the barn door that evening, she paused, her hand resting on the wooden frame. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder what her life would look like if she stopped waiting for Daniel to care. That single thought scared her, but it also made her feel alive. That night, she lay in bed next to her husband, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. He was there physically, but his heart was miles away. Emily stared at the ceiling, her mind full of questions she didn't have the courage to ask. Outside, in the quiet dark of the pasture, Apollo stood under the moonlight, calm and still. And in that stillness, Emily felt the pull of something she couldn't explain, something honest, something healing, something she wasn't ready to name. It wasn't love in the usual sense. It was connection, the kind that reminded her she was still human, still capable of feeling deeply. But she didn't yet understand how that connection would soon force her to face the truth. She'd been avoiding. Her marriage wasn't just silent, it was breaking. And the one place she found comfort would soon become the heart of her biggest choice. The storm came without warning. Wind howled through the fields, rain pounded against the windows, and thunder shook the farmhouse. Emily sat in the living room, watching the lightning flash across the sky, feeling that same storm raging inside her. Daniel was in his office again, his door half closed, his voice murmuring into a phone. She stared at him from a distance, realizing how strange it felt to live beside someone and yet feel completely alone. Unable to sit still, she grabbed her coat and stepped out into the rain. The path to the barn was slippery and cold, but she didn't care. Her heart led her there. When she reached Apollo's stall, he was pacing nervously, his coat darkened by the damp air. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, opening the door and stepping inside. "I'm here." She placed her hand on his neck, feeling the warmth of his body against the chill. He calmed almost instantly, his breathing slowing as she spoke softly. As the thunder rolled in the distance, Emily realized how safe she felt standing there. She wasn't afraid of the storm. She wasn't even thinking about the mess her life had become. For the first time in months, her heart felt steady. She ran her fingers through Apollo's mane and whispered, "You're the only one who listens." It wasn't just about the horse. It was about what he symbolized. He gave her peace, something her marriage had stopped giving long ago. Hours passed before the storm began to fade. The barn smelled of hay and rain, and the world outside grew quiet. Emily leaned against the wooden beam, her body tired but her mind clear. She didn't want to go back home, not yet. She knew what waited there: distance, silence, and the heavy air of a love that had lost its spark. She wanted warmth, understanding, something real. When she finally returned home, the sky was turning pale with dawn. Daniel stood in the doorway, his face pale with anger and confusion. "Where were you all night?" he asked, his voice tight. Emily froze, water dripping from her coat. "At the barn," she said simply. Apollo was scared of the storm. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You spent the night with a horse." His tone was sharp, but there was something else there too: hurt. Emily looked at him steadily. "Yes, because he needed me. Because he noticed I was there." Her words hit harder than she expected. Daniel said nothing for a moment. The silence between them was heavier than the thunder outside. Finally, he said, "I don't even know who you are anymore." Emily felt a tear slide down her cheek. "Neither do I," she whispered. For the rest of the day, they barely spoke. Daniel avoided her, and Emily wandered through the house feeling lost. She wanted to explain, but she didn't know how. What could she say that she had found comfort in a creature that listened better than her own husband? That she was tired of begging for attention? That her heart felt more alive in a barn than in her own living room? That evening, as the rain began to fall again, Daniel finally broke the silence. "Are you in love with that horse?" he asked quietly. His voice wasn't angry any. Marit was tired, almost broken. Emily looked at him, shocked by the question. "No," she said firmly. "I love what he reminds me of: kindness, peace, presence. Things we used to have." Daniel looked away. "So what happened to us?" he asked. Emily sighed, her voice trembling. "We stopped trying. You stopped seeing me, Daniel. And I stopped knowing how to reach you." He sat down, rubbing his forehead. "I didn't realize how far we'd drifted." "I did," she said softly. "Every single day." The rain outside grew heavier. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the storm filled the room. Emily could see the pain in his eyes, the same pain she'd been feeling for years. Maybe he hadn't meant to neglect her. Maybe life, work, and time had slowly buried their love under quiet exhaustion. Daniel finally looked up. "I don't want to lose you, Em." The words came out barely above a whisper. "You already have," she said sadly. "At least, the part of me that believed we were still the same." She walked to the window, watching the rain trail down the glass. Part of her wanted to stay and fight for their marriage. Another part wanted to walk away, to find herself again. The barn, Apollo, the peace she felt there, they weren't replacements for Daniel. They were reminders of the woman she used to be. Later that night, Daniel came to her quietly. "Maybe I haven't been the husband you needed," he said. "But I want to understand. I want to try again." Emily turned to face him. His voice wasn't defensive anymore. It was sincere, raw, and unsure. For the first time in years, she saw a spark of the man she'd fallen in love with. She nodded slowly. "Then start by listening," she said. "Not fixing, not arguing, just listening." He agreed, and they sat in silence for a while, not knowing what would come next. The storm outside had passed, but inside the real work was just beginning. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept drifting to Apollo the calm, patient soul who had unknowingly shown her what true connection felt like. She realized that love wasn't just romance or passion. It was attention. It was presence. It was the simple act of being seen. When the morning came, Emily walked to the barn again. The air was cool and fresh after the storm. Apollo stood quietly, his coat glistening in the early light. She ran her hand down his neck and whispered, "Thank you." She wasn't running from her marriage anymore. She was walking toward herself, toward the strength and clarity she had forgotten she had. Apollo hadn't replaced Daniel. He had reminded her that love only survives when both hearts stay awake. Back at the farmhouse, Daniel was waiting on the porch, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He gave her a small, hesitant smile. "Thought you might want company," he said. Emily smiled back. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a small sign that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back. In the distance, the clouds began to break and sunlight touched the wet grass. The storm was over, but its lessons would stay. Emily understood now that sometimes love fades, not because it dies, but because people forget to feed it. And sometimes it takes something pure like the quiet trust of a horse to remind you how to begin again. The morning after the storm, the world felt new. The air was crisp, the grass sparkled with dew, and the clouds drifted lazily across a pale blue sky. Emily walked toward the barn with steady steps, her thoughts clear for the first time in a long while. Apollo was waiting, standing calm and strong in the golden light. When she reached him, he greeted her with a gentle nudge, his dark eyes warm and steady. She smiled softly. "You always know when I need peace," she whispered. She brushed his coat in silence, her mind replaying the night before the argument. The honesty, the cracks finally showing in her marriage. For years she had carried quiet pain, convincing herself that love meant endurance. But now she understood something deeper. Love wasn't supposed to feel like waiting to be noticed. It was supposed to breathe, to move, to give life. Later that morning, Daniel came to the barn. He looked out of place, awkward but sincere, his usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. "You really love it here, don't you?" he asked. Emily nodded, her hands still moving through Apollo's mane. "It feels real," she said simply. "No pressure, no pretending." Daniel watched her for a long moment before speaking again. "I didn't realize how lonely you were," he admitted. "I thought keeping the business running was enough. Was never about the money," she said softly. "I just needed you to see me again." The words hung in the air, heavy but honest. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't defend himself or turn away. He stepped closer and looked around the barn, the dust floating in the sunlight. The quiet rhythm of Apollo's breath, the calm that filled the space. "Maybe I forgot what mattered," he said finally. They stood there in silence, not as husband and wife caught in blame,